By the late 1920s, cinema had already learned how to tell stories. Hollywood had standardized narrative grammar, stars, genres, and emotional arcs. Across much of the world, films increasingly resembled photographed theater or illustrated novels. The medium was becoming stable, legible, repeatable. At the same time, a smaller group of filmmakers were asking a radical question. What if cinema did not need stories at all? What if it did not need actors, scripts, or fictional situations? What if the camera could be used to observe ordinary life directly, then reorganize it through editing to see what cinema itself might become? One of the boldest answers to that question arrived in 1929. Welcome to the Cinematic Century Chronicle, and this is Man with a Movie Camera. This video contains spoilers. If you haven't seen the film yet, I recommend pausing here, watching it, and returning when you're ready. And a brief apology in advance for any mispronunciations. Thank you for understanding. The opening moments make one thing clear immediately. This film is not easing anyone in. A cameraman appears superimposed over a massive camera, stepping across its surface while carrying a camera of his own. He sets it up, adjusts it, packs it back down, and walks away. Scale has collapsed immediately. A man stands on top of the very machine he is using. The next shot shows him passing through closed curtains. The cut that follows widens the space and reveals what those curtains belong to. An empty movie theater. Rows of seats sit vacant. The room waits. From there, preparation takes over. A projector is assembled. Reels are handled. Seats fold down. Gradually, people enter and the space fills. Watching becomes an activity that assembles itself. I've always loved how unapologetic this opening feels. It doesn't ease the viewer into a story or pretend the apparatus isn't there. Instead, it pulls you directly into a world where cameras, theaters, projection, and spectatorship are all part of the same system. Before a single street or face appears, the film makes clear that cinema itself, its tools, its labor, its act of looking, is the world you're about to inhabit. Only after that does the city begin to arrive. That confidence didn't come out of nowhere. The force behind Man with a Movie Camera was Dziga Vertov. His path into cinema did not come through fiction or theater, but through newsreels and documentary work during and after the Russian Revolution. In a country reshaped by war, collapse, and reconstruction, film functioned as documentation and instruction as much as entertainment. Those conditions mattered. Nonfiction images carried authority. They circulated quickly. They shaped how people understood events they might never witness directly. Vertov absorbed that environment and developed a conviction that cinema's value lay in its ability to register reality directly through the camera's capacity to record movement, labor, and relation. By the early 1920s, Vertov was openly hostile to narrative cinema. This was not a casual preference. He viewed fiction films as inherited structures from older arts that cinema did not need. To Vertov, cinema had not yet learned to speak for itself. That position placed him in constant conflict with other filmmakers and institutions, even within the Soviet film industry. Vertov's ideas coalesced into a loose collective known as the Canucks, the name derived from Kino-Eye, Vertov's term for the camera's ability to perceive the world differently from human vision, capable of revealing patterns invisible to everyday perception. The Canucks were not subtle about their goals. They declared an explicit mission to abolish non-documentary cinema. Actors, scripts, stage scenes, and intertitles were treated as remnants of bourgeois habits and literary thinking. Cinema, they argued, should be constructed from fragments of lived reality and shaped through filming and editing into visible structures of social life. This stance made enemies quickly. It isolated Vertov professionally and placed his work under constant scrutiny. His films were debated, criticized, and often dismissed as difficult or impractical. Vertov continued making documentary and newsreel projects that embodied his principles. One criticism followed him persistently. Despite his commitment to image-based cinema, he relied heavily on intertitles to guide meaning. That tension reached its breaking point with A Sixth Part of the World in 1926. Critics seized on the contradiction. If cinema was meant to speak through images alone, why keep turning back to text? Vertov took the criticism seriously. Man with a Movie Camera was conceived. No narration, no intertitles, no script, no fictional anchor. The film would stand or fall entirely on images and editing. He even requested a notice be printed in Pravda, the Soviet Union's Central Party newspaper, framing the film explicitly as an experiment. It was not promotion in the usual sense. It functioned as advance context, an attempt to signal intention in a climate that was growing less tolerant of formal risk. Vertov understood that a film which refused explanation could easily be read as failure or provocation, and he wanted its terms established before it was seen. Production unfolded over several years across multiple cities, including Moscow, Kiev, Kharkov, and Odessa. Vertov did not designate one city as the subject. Instead, he accumulated fragments of urban life and trusted editing to align them through movement and rhythm. This approach shaped the film's visual character. The city feels unified, but never geographically specific. Streets, factories, beaches, salons, courts, and sports arenas flow into one another as parts of a shared daily cycle. The cameraman we saw at the beginning and keep encountering throughout the film is Mikhail Kaufman, Vertov's brother and closest collaborator. His labor is everywhere. He carries the camera into traffic, onto rooftops, through crowds, and inside moving vehicles. Those limits and the effort behind them define the raw material of the film, material that would only take on its final shape once it reached the editing room. The responsibility for turning this material into a film fell to Elizaveta Svilova. Editing in the late 1920s was slow and physical. Film stock was cut and assembled by hand. Every decision altered the material itself. Without intertitles or narrative structure, placement becomes the film's organizing force. Meaning forms through juxtaposition, such as cleaning gestures that echo across domestic and public spaces, or mechanical preparation that aligns with human routine. Across the film, technique follows perception. Motion accelerates and slows. Actions freeze or fracture when attention needs to sharpen or reset. Images overlap through multiple exposure. Space divides and recombines through split screens and tracking shots that tilt perspective. Midway through the film, the edit turns inward. Freeze frames appear without warning. For a moment, it feels like the image has failed. Then the film cuts to strips of celluloid being handled. Those frozen moments reappear as material on a table. Svilova is there, cutting and assembling the film we are watching. The illusion of the movie doesn't collapse. It's folded into the experience. Slow motion is introduced during a sequence that involves athletes. Bodies extend, pivot, and absorb impact. Because of the slow motion, movement is held long enough for athletic skill to register. The technique of the athletes become legible. In one variation, motion slows nearly to a freeze. Earlier in the film, that interruption led away from the image, cutting to Svilova at work. Here, the cut never comes. The shot holds, then resumes, allowing effort to unfold continuously. The beach sequence introduces a new visual texture. Cross dissolves are added to the visual language. An overhead view of the shoreline fades into bodies on the sand. Water dissolves into swimmers moving through it. Leisure arrives with a softer visual grammar. Superimposition continues throughout the film, often layering the cameraman directly into the city. As the film enters its final stretch, he appears setting up equipment towering over buildings. In another moment, his image rises from inside a glass of beer. Cinema folds itself into daily life without explanation or emphasis. As the film approaches its final act, its tone loosens. Stop-motion animation appears. A camera assembles itself, films, then walks away. Soon after, dancers and a pianist overlap in superimposition. Bodies and music share the frame, layered and moving together. All of these techniques serve a single purpose. They take an ordinary day and cutting it together until it becomes cinematic. Watching this unfold, it's hard not to imagine how disorienting and exhilarating this must have felt in 1929, a film inventing its own language in real time, openly showing its tools while refusing to explain itself. One of the film's most affecting sequences arrives through juxtaposition. A couple applies for a marriage license. The next scene shows divorce proceedings. Soon after, a funeral procession appears, followed by childbirth. There is no hierarchy, no emphasis. What stays with me is how unceremonious it feels. Paperwork is processed. Bodies move through institutions designed to manage transition efficiently. Love begins and dissolves. People enter the world and leave it. These events happen continuously, often without witnesses beyond the systems that record them. This is one of the moments where man with a movie camera feels most confident in its method. Nothing is underlined, nothing is explained. The sequence trusts that attention alone is enough. When Man with a Movie Camera was released, responses were divided. Some recognized its ambition, Others struggled to place it. It was not a popular success, and it did not become a model for state-approved production. As the 1930s approached, Soviet cinema shifted decisively toward narrative clarity and ideological legibility. The institutional space that had allowed man with a movie camera to exist narrowed quickly. Vertov continued working throughout the decade, but his later films operated under tighter constraints and received uneven support. The radical freedom that defined his 1929 experiment did not return. His insistence on nonfiction form and formal rigor left him increasingly isolated within an industry moving in a different direction. Over time, Man with a Movie Camera came to stand apart from his later work, not as a stepping stone, but as the moment when his ideas were realized at their fullest and most unguarded. Kaufman eventually distanced himself from Vertov over questions of authorship and creative recognition. As the cameraman, his work involved physical risk, improvisation, and constant decision-making inside uncontrolled environments. Over time, he felt those contributions had been absorbed into a single authorial vision that left little room for shared credit. Their separation exposed tensions within the Kino-Eye project itself, between its collective ideals and the reality of how creative ownership was assigned. Svilova continued working steadily in Soviet cinema for decades, though her role in shaping Man with a Movie Camera was rarely discussed as authorship at the time. That recognition emerged much later, as film criticism began to treat editing as a creative force rather than a technical function. For a time, the film survived mainly within specialist circles. Its reputation changed gradually as film criticism expanded to take editing, rhythm, and form seriously. What changed was not the film, but how it was watched. Taken together, their trajectories reflect the film's larger fate. Man with a Movie Camera endured, but the collaborative and institutional conditions that made it possible did not. When Man with a Movie Camera was released, it offered no assurances. It stripped cinema of the structures that had begun to stabilize the medium and replaced them with exposure. No actors, no script, no text to guide interpretation. That gamble defines its radicalism. The film commits to daily life as raw material and forces cinema to account for what happens when nothing is staged and nothing is explained. It demonstrated that cinema could be built entirely from the movement of everyday life and sustained through editing alone. Nearly a century later, it stands as evidence of a moment when cinema abandoned its safety nets and discovered how far observation could be pushed. Next time on Cinematic Century Chronicle, before we move into the 1930s, we're taking a brief pause in the journey to look back at the 1920s. From silent experimentation to the arrival of sound, we'll trace how a single decade reshaped the language of cinema. We will revisit the films we covered and acknowledge the ones we didn't, including the moments that changed everything. Subscribe and join me as we continue to chronicle 100 years of film, one story at a time. Until next time, have a great rest of your day.